Welcome to episode 5 of Unlayered. And before we get into the topic, Dave, I saw you've been active on Twitter these days, busting some myths, quelling some FUD. What's been going on?
It's a full-time job. There's been a few things. Hard to narrow it down, but I think you're talking about... There was a thread someone put out yesterday, quite a long thread on the negative tokenomics, really, around the DePIN projects on Solana. So he covered Hivemapper, Helium, and Render. And he just seemed to have sort of made most of the stats up. He was claiming that one account held like 95% of the tokens in like 2 of the projects. It was just crazy talk, really. So I actually bothered to go into the numbers and and clarify. And I think on Helium, it was the biggest account had about 1% of the tokens, and the biggest 5 accounts held about 5%. So it was just miles off. I think
completely off.
Yeah. I think Render, it was maybe 30% held by the largest accounts. I'm assuming that's Treasury. I didn't look too close into it, but Treasury and incentive rewards, crucially. And then Hivemapper, which only went live about 4 months ago, that a large amount is held. But if you actually look at the tokenomics for Hivemapper, I just had a quick look, and it seems that all the tokens are reserved for people who are contributing to the map. So I'm not entirely sure what the VCs are receiving, or if that was just excluded from their tokenomic summary, which would be very, very strange. I've never seen that before. So basically, it's been live for 4 months, and they are retaining almost all of their tokens because, funnily enough, they want to pay people to contribute to building out this Google Map competitor.
Right. I guess was that guy's thesis. I didn't read the entire thread, but it seemed like his thesis was, these VCs are holding basically all the supply and they're going to dump it on retail or whatever. Was that kind of the gist of it, or something more nefarious?
Yeah, exactly. Which is, I don't know, slightly ironic because I think it was an Ethereum fan. I'm sorry to say. And interestingly, at the moment, I think Optimism are about to. So they've got current circulating supply. It's one of these classic low float, high FTV. So high total valuation, but low circulating. And Optimism, they're about to more than double their circulating supply, maybe today or maybe in the next few days. But someone did an interesting thread on that, and they said, if you want to trade against that, you're basically trading against A16Z, all of the Optimism insiders, and they've timed it for some good news, basically, as well,
of course,
to counteract the sell pressure. But he also had the example for SUI, which I think maybe 15% of the circulating supply is about to come through, and he said that one was less sturdy because the tokens which are coming in are for airdrop holders. So then you're only trading against retail, and also the good news that they've lined up is an IDO on the same day, and it's like SuiSwap, which they valued like $200 million. And the photo they'd used for SuiSwap was in fact from Aptos Swap. They hadn't even changed the name on it or anything. So it seemed a sort of low quality way to try and pump Sui tokens. So I think it's just one of those things, isn't it? It's projects in the early stages have to deal with the release of tokens, throughout those early years. And that's a difficult thing to manage, especially in a bull market.
But it was interesting that he kind of called out all of these DePIN projects because, funny enough, we just happened to talk to a protocol developer for one of the bigger projects. But before we kind of intro him and get into that episode, would love to hear your thoughts, Dave, on how you see the DePIN space. I know it's kind of one of your favorite subsectors within crypto, and I think it's a very exciting area generally.
I think there's a very real chance that crypto can build out huge infrastructure projects using tokenomics. And it's one of these things where by sort of getting the general public to help grow these projects, rather than just using a centralized entity, you can legitimately lower costs. You can legitimately have a large community of contributors who are being incentivized with pseudo equity, really, in the project. And also the update speed, or the growth speed, is just so much faster. So something like Hivemapper, I think the global map, which is being produced by Hivemapper, it's growing at something like 200 times the speed of Google Map. And because you're outsourcing to the general public, suddenly areas which maybe don't make financial sense for Google to go and map,
Yeah,
maybe poorer developing areas around the world.
that last mile.
Yeah, exactly. Suddenly, you're not actually relying on sending someone, maybe on a US wage to go and fly out to these places and then spending 500,000 on a car to go and drive around. Instead, you can just get the local population to map it for you. You can, update quicker. And then what does that mean for the user? It just means that they're going to be getting cheaper products because the capital costs of these projects is so much reduced from the centralized counterparts. So you're getting a cheaper product, and generally you're getting a better product, one that's being updated regularly. The total addressable market of some of these markets that they're going after is enormous. Like Helium is 200 million market cap, and yeah, we're talking about Helium today, 200 million market cap. And I think I looked it up earlier, the market cap of all of the wireless providers around the world is like 2.5 trillion. So Helium currently occupies about 0.01% of the total addressable market, if you like. And yet it's built out the largest LoRaWAN or IoT network in the world. And it was also the fastest growing wireless network ever deployed. So, to think that currently only occupies 1 basis point of the entire total addressable market, to me is crazy. And I just think there has to be growth, so much growth.
A lot of potential energy there. Yeah, I mean, what excites me most about DePIN on a similar point is just this idea that telecom providers today don't always have the strongest incentive to deploy capital to improve their networks. Oftentimes, municipalities have specific laws that require a new potential competitor to be able to serve the entire district. It's either all or nothing. And so that's oftentimes why you see monopolies pop up in municipalities. There's a lot of reasons for that. But I think to your point about the last mile problem, DePIN networks like Helium or Pollen or something like that, they don't have to adhere to these obscure arbitrary laws. If someone just decides that they want to put up a node for 5G or something like that, they can just do it, even if they're on a farm far away from everybody else. And they get incentivized to do that specifically because they are a last mile person. It could be potentially extremely powerful, to your point, because of just how big this market is. And I think it's one of the most interesting use cases of crypto, which ultimately boils down to this incentivization mechanism for people to coordinate. And we're seeing the early experiments today. We're in the early innings, but I think we're learning a lot. And projects like Helium are kind of leading the charge right now.
I was listening to the Hivemapper CEO
Mm-hmm.
the other day on a podcast, and he made the point that currently all the VC money basically is focused on largely infrastructure, largely scaling Ethereum, and outside of that, probably NFTs is probably taking a large chunk of it. And yet, there's very little investment. There's very little focus. If you go to a crypto conference, very little focus on DePIN projects. And he's like, at some point, the investment in crypto has to reflect the real world economy. It has to reflect how large, wireless providers are in the real world economy, how large GPU providers are in the real world economy. Because otherwise, if we're just focusing on these niche areas, which don't necessarily correlate with, how big industries are in the real world, then crypto is potentially doomed to always remain a sort of niche product. So I think it's valid, and I think surely over the next few years, this whole sector of DePIN is bound to explode with both investment and rising demand and supply.
Absolutely. I think that the AI move has also been kind of a tailwind for a lot of these DePIN projects, your Filecoins of the world, your renders of the world. So a lot of interesting things happening simultaneously that I think could serve as tailwinds for this really exciting sector of crypto.
Yeah, just on the AI point, again, I heard Tushar from Multicoin say that, in his view, one of the things we're certain about with the advent of AI is that the requirement for computing power will increase 100 times to 1,000 times and maybe 10,000 times. So, if you think that's the paradigm shift that we're going to be living through over the next 10, 20, 30 years, that some of these projects, the market is going to grow, the AI market is going to grow, and that's going to drag a lot of the crypto market along with it because there's so many areas where it does marry really, really well with it. One of them being render, which is coming to Solana, which will help provide GPU power potentially for training and inference of AI models.
Absolutely. It just makes too much sense for crypto to serve as kind of a rail to power this stuff. Because to your point, like 10,000x, like, let's assume an increase in demand for computation in the cloud. Maybe the legacy players here, the AWS's, Google Clouds of the world, can handle that demand. But I suspect we're going to need kind of these decentralized networks to pick up the slack too. And it just makes a ton of sense from a developer standpoint if you're making calls for computation power on the cloud to use an internet native currency versus trying to go through some centralized party and then settle with dollars or whatever currency you're using. It just feels like a much clunkier way to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, the token also has the dual benefit of incentivizing people. Yeah, I'm looking forward to June the 5th when Apple are going to release their new VR AR goggles.
Oh, yeah.
That could be another push forward in technology. It might get the metaverse coins
Yeah.
running. And I'm sure it's just going to keep on increasing this drive for GPU and, this meshing of sort of AI and VR. And it's crazy, crazy time we're living through.
No doubt. No doubt. Yeah, we'll have to do an episode on just that kind of side of crypto. Today, we are talking with Noah, head of protocol engineering at Helium Foundation. You can find Noah on Twitter. He is at redacted_Noah. And prior to his work at Helium, he was the founder of Strata Protocol, which was a protocol for creating tokens on Solana. Obviously, very knowledgeable and super interesting conversation from the perspective of a builder in this burgeoning DePIN space. Welcome, Noah. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
For sure, for sure. I actually am curious. When I kind of dig in a bit on Strata, your history there. From what I understand, they did social tokens on Solana. I mean, what was that experience like? How did you kind of get into that side of crypto?
Yeah, that was it accidentally became my specialty. So when I was originally looking at Solana, it was just because my brother was working at Solana. And so I kind of wanted to play around with it. I wanted to learn Rust. And I'm kind of if you talk to anybody, you'll hear that I'm a very firm believer in like you have to do something, you have to actually go build something. So anytime I'm looking to learn a new language, learn a new framework, I'm like, all right, what's going to be like my toy project? Like, am I going to build a fake Twitter? And so at the time when I started with this stuff, BitClout was going off, and so I was like, oh, social tokens, like this is really cool. This is an interesting way for creators to monetize. How would I build it on Solana? And so it was kind of a theoretical thing. And I started hacking with it on the weekend. And I figured I didn't want to build Twitter. So I would just overlay the tokens on Twitter itself.
Right.
Yeah. And it just kind of took off from there. I like put it in a hackathon. And then all of a sudden we had investors. And I ended up quitting my job in finance. It was a whirlwind. But it eventually became Strata because we realized like social tokens are like the epitome of launching a token, right? Like it has to be one click, it has to be super easy. Like
Yeah.
And so we ended up building a lot of infrastructure that made it super easy to launch tokens. And I think that NFTs kind of became the way that creators build a community and monetize in crypto. I don't think social tokens really won that war, and so we kind of pivoted to this token launchpad thing, and then we happened to pivot to a token launchpad at the beginning of a bear market where people aren't launching many tokens.
So help us understand though. So you kind of started your journey into crypto, let's say, with Strata Protocol. How did you find your way over to working on Helium?
Yeah, so that was fortuitous. I got a guardian angel somewhere, but it just kind of happened to be that a lot of the stuff that we were experimenting with at Strata were things that Helium was trying to build, right? So kind of near the tail end of Strata, we are like, okay, what are the purposes for launching a token? One of the major purposes is creating a DAO. And I think people have generally been finding that DAOs eventually lead to the need for sub DAOs because it's just too much going on at once. So we had actually started experimenting with Great Protocol having sub-DAOs within Grape using strata bonding curves. And Helium is now fully sub-DAOed up. They have an IoT sub-DAO and they have a mobile sub-DAO. And the way those tokens relate to each other is actually similar to a strata bonding curve. It's one way. So with the strata bonding curve, you could buy tokens and it would mint them. Then you could burn tokens and get back the reserves. With Helium treasuries, you can take like IoT tokens and you can burn them in exchange for Helium HNT tokens, but you can't go the other way around. So you can only get IoT tokens by earning them via mining. So it's kind of similar, but also kind of different. So we weren't necessarily able to like reuse all the contracts, but we had experience in building this kind of thing. And also Helium just they needed a Solana native team to go and build this because like it is hard enough to get past the learning curve on Solana, but to get past the learning curve on Solana and then try to go 0 to 100 on something that was built over the course of like 3 or 4 years, that would be insanity.
So obviously, Helium is a decentralized physical infrastructure network, which I think on this show we're sort of really interested in and bullish about their prospects over the next few years as they grow. Arguably, the first one was Bitcoin itself. That was relying on a distributed group of nodes, if you like, around the world. So just wondering on what your thoughts are really on DePIN projects as a category, and are you bullish on them, and what do you see as their main strengths?
I mean, to me, it's like one of the most bullish things in crypto right now. I had kind of at the tail end of Strata there come out of some burnout from just like the amount of noise that's getting launched in crypto, right? Like NFT projects that do nothing, tokens that do absolutely nothing. And like, I don't mean this to say like I'm this huge skeptic and like, there's no value in the community that they create. But like when Helium came to me and like, just like, oh, here's this thing that actually has physical devices, a network that's deployed that has this built-in like actual utility. It's not fake. It's not, based off of nothing. It's not based on like, the creator fool theory. It's literally providing a service that people need, which is something really cool that DePIN in general is able to accomplish. And then the other really interesting thing about Helium was like it hit scaling problems. And I come from data. I love scaling problems, right? It hit scaling problems with blockchain in general. So it's like, oh, this is like a really, really cool cross section of skills. And yeah, I mean, you're seeing Helium come to Solana, you're seeing Render come to Solana, you're seeing, I think I just saw this thing called Tal. We're about to probably just see a boom of these things on Solana because it makes more sense to have a general purpose blockchain because you can lean on all of the integrations, right? So, Helium has an Orca pool, they have Radium. There's just a ton of integrations that we have. Building
So
the protocol, we were able to use Clockwork and Switchboard and Pith and a whole bunch of other things. So, like, you have a lot there. And I'm actually really interested in kind of building out a DePIN toolkit for Solana because we solved a lot of the problems for Helium, and a lot of them we solved in a generic way. And so, post launch, post taking one blockchain and shoving it into another, in the interest of bug fixes, some of the stuff got a little less generic, but would like to at some point make it more generic again, so that we can make it way, way easier for people to go and launch a DePIN project on Solana.
And just for the benefit of our listeners, do you want to just explain maybe how Helium's IoT network functions, how it's been able to grow this network? Yeah, what the factors are that's helped it scale.
So the simple idea here is you have some kind of signal that you want to cover the world in, whether that be like 5G or IoT. What is the best way to get that deployed? So the traditional way of deploying it, right? If you talk about like, cell phones, right? They put up cell phone towers. And in order to have a cell phone tower, you have to go and lease that land from somebody, and then, actually go and build it. But what if you just let people do it? Right. So I can just go and take this thing, I can shove it on the roof of my house, and now I'm providing signal for the people in my area. Now, why would I do that? Why would I provide signal for everybody? I'm selfish. We all are. I do it because I mine tokens. And so, like, the very original Helium setup was you throw this IoT, which is a special kind of signal that goes like 100 miles. It's really good for like low power sensors, things like that. And you put it on your rooftop and you mine HNT in exchange for providing the signal. And then people that are going and using the signal basically burn HNT into data credits that they can then use. So it's this like closed system where people are, buying the token in order to get data, and then people are earning the token in order for it, because they provide the data. Now it got a little bit more complicated because now we have multiple signal types. And so you want IoT, you want 5G signal, maybe you eventually want Wi Fi signal. And so it came up with these sub DAOs and these sub tokens where it's still very much the same model. You're still, mining tokens in exchange for providing coverage. There's just now multiple of them and they're kind of subgrouped.
So I think it makes sense for something like, putting out a 5G service, very capital intensive for like a corporation to do it. Verizon, AT&T, these guys are going to drag their feet for an eternity to, give people fast internet, whether it's through cables, whether it's through 5G, putting out towers. So I get the benefit in terms of the relying on decentralized network, relying on people to like put these on their houses or wherever, their apartments. That makes sense. I think one of the key sticking points that I struggle with sometimes is that how does the demand side of that equation work? Where in the US, a lot of people have access to broadband, they have access to 4G or 5G, depending where they're at. And so the lack of like huge improvement over their existing lives to switch over to something like getting their phone service through maybe Helium or some other provider, I feel like that makes it hard to incent these capital deployers, let's call them, who are running these nodes to then bootstrap the network. So it becomes this like, I just feel like, is there certain markets where this might actually take off faster? Or are you seeing adoption even in the US?
Yeah, so a couple things there. The first thing is Helium Mobile is actually kind of, they have this agreement with T-Mobile where you like go and use the Helium network as much as you can, which is actually, one of the big benefits of it is cheaper to use. So the data is cheaper, so you want to use it as much as possible. And then when you fall out, you roam onto the T-Mobile network. So you have like all the same coverage plus some more coverage, which is why you would want to use it. Now, the reason this is important is because 5G is fundamentally different than like 4G. It has a really really short range, and it actually gets impeded by things like buildings, um, and so it's a really hard signal to get that last mile, which is why you basically only see 5G in major cities, because it's like really hard to coat an area in this stuff. And so you've got this like really low range thing, and these cell phone companies literally have to go like lease from whoever owns this building this like 1 square meter plot on top of the building to put up this like radio, right? So it's much easier for something like Helium to get in there because there's no like negotiating a lease, or at least if someone's negotiating the lease, they're kind of doing it on their own so that they can go put a Helium hotspot up there. It's also way easier to get this into lower income communities where maybe Verizon's not really going to prioritize the lower income community because they're not buying 5G capable phones, but the community themselves could invest in putting up a Helium hotspot, and now they actually have 5G.
Yeah, because you're saving, aren't you, on the land that a Verizon would have to go out and buy. You're saving on, or the leases or whatever. But you're also sort of saving on the hardware, aren't you? Because the people who put up these hotspots on their roofs, they're actually buying the hardware from Helium. So in terms of capital upfront requirements for a company to come in, is just sort of transformational, isn't it, compared to pre-crypto token incentive days, where you would need, I don't know, 50, 100 million. I have no idea how much it's going to cost to build this out. Whereas presumably Helium can do it, incredibly cheaply.
Yeah, well, and even better than that, it's the hotspots themselves aren't even coming from Helium. There are a bunch of manufacturers, we call them makers, that make these hotspots. And so there's actually incredible competition amongst all of these manufacturers to get the price as low as humanly possible, because like people are trying to make the best bang for their buck. Like, how much can I mine versus how much did I pay for this hotspot? So like in the IoT realm, I'm pretty sure we're going to get down to like $100 hotspots here pretty soon, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. Because like I think originally these things were like 400 and something dollars. So you get like, yeah, you just get better deployment across all facets. And the whole thing is community governed. And so it's, very open to see how these things are working. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of efficiency gains to be had. And it kind of helps solve that chicken and egg problem because, crypto allows you to grow the community much faster than traditional means.
So let's say, for instance, I'm in New York City and I want to be a node operator for 5G. So am I like setting this up in my apartment? And then who is the ISP at the end of the day? Like, am I connecting this to my existing modem and I'm getting cable from Time Warner or something like that? Like who are the stakeholders here at play? And then there's like someone connecting to this node theoretically, right? Like to your point, who's using maybe Helium Mobile.
Yeah. So we are Helium is explicitly not an ISP, right? It's the wireless signal. It's not the ISP. So people connect these through a variety of ISPs. If you were like in New York and you have Comcast and you plug the Ethernet cable into your IoT hotspot, then it's relaying through Comcast or AT&T or whoever you have. And so like yeah, if you're setting one of these things up, you should make sure your ISP allows this type of thing.
So something which strikes me is so something like Bitcoin, it needs all of these nodes to be geographically distributed for the decentralization properties, basically. Whereas something like Helium, it needs them not for that so much as the distribution. If you're going to create a wireless network, you want it to have as much coverage as possible. And yet, you talk quite often, during this interview about sub DAOs, community ownership. So, do you think even though it's distributed not necessarily for decentralization purposes, but do you think it is really important that the network is decentralized and is in the hands of the community as opposed to, centrally controlled?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get like tinfoil hatty, but like it it is I think pretty important that these things are decentralized because then no one entity can just go and shut it off, right? And having freedom of communication ways is really important. I'd love to see ISPs get decentralized too, because that's the one thing this is kind of missing. But there's just only so much that you can do there. That's a really hard problem. But yeah, I mean, even Helium, like it incentivizes distributing things geographically. So if you're like, if there's already 10 hotspots by you and you put up like the 11th one, you're not going to make very much. And actually you make everybody in your grid earn less.
Yeah.
So it kind of incentivizes not crowding, which is, kind of an interesting thing because people in Helium community will actually like message each other and be like, hey, if you move your hotspot over like 500 feet, we'll be covering 2 grids. It's actually more like people are more genial about it than you would think, which is nice. Yeah, it's not people like I'm gonna kick your door down.
Not yet.
Yeah,
Not
not
yet.
yet anyway.
Just wondering on the IoT network, because prior to Helium, am I right in thinking that there wasn't an IoT network really? Because maybe the revenue that you can actually receive from these small, IoT tracking devices, the revenue tends to be quite low, and obviously to set up an entire wireless network is capitally intensive prior to Helium. So was this the first IoT network, and how does the company see the future really of that space? Are they seeing like a lot of growth really since Helium's been set up?
Yeah, so generally what people used to do is like let's say you were trying to set up tracking inside like a shipping warehouse. What people used to do is they would just go deploy their own IoT network. So they would like go deploy a bunch of hotspots around the warehouse, or they're setting up farming sensors. They would go deploy a bunch of hotspots around the farm, and then they would like kind of own their own network, and it was this closed thing. And then you would put sensors on it. And there are actually still to this day companies that specialize in, I think, deploying these like small networks for your particular use case. Of course, this breaks down if you want to do something like package tracking, inside like a UPS truck, right? Because now you're, going across the United States, so you'd have to like plant these down everywhere. And I think that's kind of the problem that the original people at Nova Labs saw. They're like, oh, well, like if we want to deploy sensors, we need to have a network first. And like, how do we spread this network as much as possible? And so, yeah, now Helium is the largest IoT network, and I don't think anything else even comes close.
Gotcha. Can we maybe drill down a bit into, and I think you touched on it before, but the incentivization through tokens, which is, I guess, the key kind of differentiator that blockchains bring to this sector we call DePIN. Like, how does Helium think about that? Introducing the token, incentivizing people with it, avoiding issues with dilution, and ensuring like this whole ecosystem is balanced.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really hard problem, right? So you have to make sure that people are properly incentivized. You have to make sure that things aren't getting diluted too much, and you also have to make sure that Gensler doesn't kick your door down. Uh, and so, yeah, I
Most
am.
importantly,
I'm a little bit nervous to even answer questions about the tokens on a podcast for that reason, because I just there are legal issues abound with tokens. But I think Helium does a very good job of it.
If I understand it correctly, I think that there is one token which is more like a stable coin. I was just listening to a podcast, I think, with Amir talking about it, and he said that the multi-coin guys had suggested it purely because if you're an enterprise institution and you want to interact with the Helium network, you don't want to be holding highly volatile crypto assets on your balance sheet. And so I think the guys at Multicoin had encouraged them early on to move to like a dual token setup, is how I understand it, just to try and get past that pain point of expecting normies and big corporations to be holding crypto. So yeah, it seemed a sensible idea, and I think Render as well are following it, as far as I understand.
Yeah, yeah, it's called the data credit. Yeah, I think it's great because actually a lot of people that are using the sensor network, they don't even know or care that the thing is crypto. Like the miners care about the crypto because they're earning crypto, but like we have this data credits portal now that was built by Sphere where you can literally just load up on data credits via like paying with credit card. And so you can just buy like, 1,000 data credits, which will give you, plenty, and then just have your sensors use that, and you don't even have to know that crypto is going on, which is great for cost prediction, right? Because you know that one data credit maybe equals 1 megabyte or something over the network. That's not the actual thing. I don't know the actual conversion, but it's much easier to plan versus if you're talking about like if you had to pay for the network usage in terms of HNT. Now, like HNT was $50, and then HNT goes down. Now all of a sudden, like it's hard to plan these things. Then the question becomes, okay, well, how do you still tie that to the success of the network? And so the way it works is the data credit itself is pinned to a dollar value, but you have to burn HNT, a dollar value amount of HNT to get that data credit. And so that's actually where on Solana Pith comes in, where, Pith says, hey, HNT is worth, $1.50 right now. So if you want, I think it's with 5 decimals, but like if you want 1,500 data credits, you go and burn, 0.15 HNT or something like that. I did the math horribly wrong there, but you get the idea. You burn HNT, which makes HNT deflationary on the long tail of things, and you get data credits. And so it's really interesting what happens to this model at the end time, right? Because right now Helium is inflationary, right? Because we are still actively having HNT tokens be minted by the protocol into these subDAO treasuries, and the subDAOs themselves are issuing, or they're having tokens minted for mining rewards. But what happens is, as time goes on, similar to Bitcoin, the rewards keep happening and happening and happening. And what happens is, at some point, the amount of data credits, like the amount of HNT getting burned for data credits, is actually like more than the amount of HNT getting issued. And so there's this really interesting concept called net emissions, which tries to keep HNT deflationary, but allows that HNT that's getting burned for data credits to then be resent out to the miners. And so what you get is after 50 years or so, the whole system is actually completely closed. It's a closed loop. People burn HNT in order to pay for network usage, and the miners get exactly that back. right? Like it's zero, money in equals money out, which is what you want. Now, obviously, when you're trying to bootstrap a network and you're trying to grow it, these tokens are being issued kind of in an inflationary manner because you're basically using that to grow the network, and that is your incentive to grow the network faster. And in a way, all these people that are mining the tokens, if they hold on to the tokens, are taking a stake in the network, and that also gives them ability to vote and things like that.
So Helium had a good problem in that too much activity, congestion, whatever you want to call it, but needed to make a change. And they made that move to Solana. But would love to learn a bit more contextually, like how did Helium decide to do Solana? Why not AppChain or an L2 or something like that? What was it about Solana that made the most sense for Helium's transition?
Yeah, I mean, I I can speak to it a little bit, but I'm the guy that they came to after they decided Solana.
Sure.
Obviously, I'm a Solana maxi. um, but no, I think originally, right when they went and built this thing, I think it was like 2017 or 2019. I can't remember when they launched their blockchain, but the only option available for general purpose blockchain was ETH, and they kind of correctly assumed they were like, this is going to get way too expensive for the amount of transactions that we're trying to run through it. So we need to build our own. That was not necessarily true anymore in 2022, right? It's very, very hard, as the Solana core devs and all the validators can tell you. It's very, very hard to maintain a blockchain. And so this was getting to be a drag, and it wasn't really Helium's core tenant, right? Helium's core tenant is to you know cover the world in signal and be the people's network and provide internet. It's not to be the people's blockchain, right? So yeah, they went looking at what are all the alternatives, right? And there are tons of them, and every time you said Solana, there'd be a bunch of people screaming, well, why not Hedera? Why not this? Why not that? But the reality is that if you look at the blockchain ecosystem, there's just not that many that are actually able to do the kind of volume that Solana is able to handle. And there are a bunch of them claiming to be able to do it, but none of them have been battle tested quite as hard as Solana, right? Like Solana had, you know, the NFT hype go through it, and all of these botters and just all of the insanity of the hype, and it did go down a few times, but now it's kind of grown from that. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons. I think most of them are outlined, and I think I don't know, it's hip 70 something was the transition to Solana. I think there's also another hip where somebody was proposing a different blockchain. But I mean, you look at Render, and Render's coming here too. Like it makes sense. There's an entire ecosystem to compose around. It's not like Solana is this brand new thing, right? Like Sui and Aptos are kind of similar, right? But they're brand new. Like Helium's not going to go to a completely new chain with nothing built on it yet, right? Like, so yeah, at the risk of maxis of other chains hearing this podcast and bludgeoning me, which they always do.
They always will.
Um, they always will. I was like, no, your argument is stupid. Algorithm, scales better than
Oh
Solana.
God.
And like, I don't know, maybe it does, but we're here and we built the stuff, and I like Solana. So
Yeah. I think that's a very salient point that I want to just underscore a bit is that yes, there's other blockchains that could theoretically do a lot of transactions, but Solana is like literally the only one that survived 2021, which was a crazy year in terms of, the NFTs, just the general bull market vibes. And it got through a lot of the issues that it struggled with in the early outages. And it seems like it's weathered the storm, so to speak, and it's here. And the other point you made is like it has a lot of projects ancillary to it. And that's kind of my next question is what else do you guys rely on in the Solana ecosystem? You brought up Pith, you brought up Orca. Like, does that also dovetail with kind of your broader thesis as to why it's a good ecosystem to build in?
oh yeah, literally every day I'm using something that somebody else has built. I think the incredible thing about the actual the protocol side, so the smart contracts, there was dozens of engineers involved in the entire transition, especially like Nova Labs helped out a ton with the oracles, and kind of deciding who gets what rewards. But the actual smart contracts, so like Helium program library, built by basically 3 people in 6 months, which is insane, right? Like Helium itself has been years and years and years in the making, building all of this stuff. And the only reason, only possible on Solana, is because we were able to make use of all of these things. So like, we needed to get the number of active devices sent to the blockchain so that we could use it in sub-DAO rewards calculation, which by the way is completely new, didn't exist on the old chain. Just use Switchboard. We need pricing information. Could have used Switchboard, but has better publishers, right? So we use Pith for that. We needed the system to basically have a heartbeat, right? Like it's like a circulatory system where tokens are going out every single day. Clockwork, heartbeat, right there. It literally since launch at UTC at midnight every day, it's just been trucking, and I don't even check it anymore because it's so reliable. I'm trying to think. Oh, squads, right? We don't want to have a single key managing our programs or any of the configurations. So we have squads. We wanted to have DAOs and voting. Well, Realms already exists. Like basically everything that you could possibly want to do, there's pretty much a plugin available for it. And long term, I'd like to see that happen with DePIN too, right? Like we built a bunch of bespoke stuff to issue rewards to miners, but we also did that in a generic way so other people can go and use it, because the idea is rewards just accumulate to an NFT, and that NFT represents your ownership of whatever the physical miner is. And then you can go and claim those rewards. But that's like a generalized model. Anybody can use that, right? Like, Render could issue an NFT for each GPU cluster. So Solana makes it a lot easier because there are a bunch of companies. Oh, Helios too, right? Like webhooks to get our data and be able to actually use it, because Solana is basically a really fancy NoSQL database, which is great for point queries, but terrible for any kind of other queries.
Yeah, it feels like for maybe like the last year, there's been a big narrative in crypto about app chains are going to be the future. Obviously, DYDX have moved over to create theirs, but it's always seemed strange to me that there hasn't been so much of a narrative about the fact that Helium are basically moving from their own app chain, if you like, to a general purpose blockchain. And yeah, you've just talked around a lot of the advantages that you get when you make that move. Do you have any thoughts on how you think that will go in the future about when protocols become big or whatever? Do you think that there will be major advantages of moving to app chains, or do you think the composability that you get on general purpose blockchains will prove more useful?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of, I mean, yeah, Helium didn't want to do its own app chain because, like, the collective sigh of, oh my God, managing another blockchain was, like I'm telling you, like, people talk about app chains like it's easy to maintain a blockchain. I'm promising
Right.
you it is not.
No way.
And so, like, I don't know, it's a question of volume, right? And what you're trying to accomplish. I think we just saw like Cube announced that is, kind of building an exchange, and it's based on Solana, but I'm pretty sure they're not using Solana exactly. They're using their own like cluster of it. Why? Because they want low latency and high throughput. And so, maybe a lot of these nodes are, going to be geographically located close to each other so they can have quicker block times or something like that, right? And so in that context, yeah, it totally makes sense to have your own chain. And DYDX is kind of a similar case, right? Like they have a lot of volume, they want to get the latency down. Like it kind of makes sense for them to do their own app chain. But every single company needs to look at it, and like you really have to look at it, like, is my volume legitimate? I was arguing with someone on Twitter earlier. He was talking about updating their NFT once a second, and my question when I see something like that is, do you really need to be hitting the blockchain once a second? Like that seems like a bad design. And indeed, Helium had this same exact problem. It's like, well, we want to issue rewards every 15 minutes. So now we need to send tokens to all million wallets on
Oh my
Helium
God.
every 15 minutes. A million transactions every 15 minutes, right? Like, no, no, don't do things like that. So like a lot of the time the answer is like of why you can't build on a composable, general purpose train is because you just need to like switch your view and be like, okay, maybe the thing that's limiting us, maybe let's not do it. And so like the way Helium does it now is all of the rewards kind of accumulate to an NFT, but that's happening via decentralized oracles, right? And so the oracles have an idea of what each NFT is owned. The blockchain doesn't have any idea of what they're owed until the oracle tells them. And the oracle only needs to tell them when somebody wants to go claim their rewards. So when I want to go, claim my 10 IoT that are sitting on my miners, then the oracle needs to go and write down to the blockchain, hey, this thing has, earned 10 IoT in its lifetime. And then the blockchain knows that you've only claimed 0 in its lifetime. So I can, let you claim the difference. And indeed, even Pith is going to this model now, where the generalized, the current or implementation of Pith on Solana is just sending data to the blockchain. But PithNet and kind of the new implementation of Pith says, hey, like the client needs to go request from PithNet to write to the blockchain, and it can actually do that in the same transaction and say, in this transaction, Oracle says price is this, it signed it. Now go do my HNT to data credit swap. And it's actually better because that price in that transaction is the freshest price down to, milliseconds, as opposed to, yeah, it was written to the blockchain a half second ago before your transaction ran. So this idea of doing things lazily is way better for scalability. And I think with blockchain, at least currently being such a limited resource that I'm sorry, even Sol Maxis, it can't scale horizontally. It literally cannot. So we can't just shove infinite things through it. You can't just hit it once a second. You can't hit it every 15 minutes with a million transactions. And even if you run your own app chain, sure, that's going to work for a while. But as Helium found out, originally they were running a chain literally on the miners. You hit scaling issues. So my opinion is it generally makes sense to, you know, design your architecture around not spamming the fuck out of the blockchain. Uh, and then you can totally use a general purpose one, because the really important thing is the ownership primitives, right? And the ownership primitives are on Solana. And once you have them, anybody can do whatever they want with them. And that's where kind of the volume comes from. It shouldn't come from your protocol just spamming for the sake of spam.
I was actually in the render Telegram when they said that they were thinking about moving to Solana, and a lot of the complaints that you had from people were, of course, Solana's always down, which is a whole subject in and of itself. But I think what you've just been describing there, it shows that that's not the core priority, if I understand correctly, of these DePIN projects, because the money is only coming to the hotspot when they actually demand it from the blockchain. So if a blockchain does, heaven forbid, go down for 12 hours again, all that's doing, am I correct in thinking, is just that would just delay the time that someone could claim their rewards?
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. There's all sorts of problems that come with doing this oracle based approach, because you need to find a way to decentralize the oracles. And maybe with the future of computing, we find a way to scale blockchains horizontally, and then this isn't a problem anymore. But for now, the design is really robust, right? Like Helium has oracles that are calculating the rewards. If Solana goes down, sure, you can't send your tokens or claim your tokens for a little bit, but once it comes back up, you're fine. I also just don't really see. I mean, someone's going to quote this, but I don't see Solana going down for 12 hours again. I think it's just a ton of work has gone into making it more reliable. And to the point I made earlier, like I trust the things that have been battle tested over the things that haven't. Really cheap for someone to come in from one of these newer chains and be like, "Hey, we can handle the volume. We did a test where we tested DDoSing it." Like,
Yeah.
yeah, but your test didn't have thousands of degens where there were literally companies whose entire purpose was to sell degens of botting scripts. Like there were hundreds of different botting scripts, and people were rating which one spam Solana better because it made you have a better chance of like getting the bit. Like it was
Oh my god.
absolute fucking madness. And if you think that you can test that and simulate that, I'm sorry, you're wrong. You just can't. Like,
Dude, this is reminding me of like that whole industry in sneakers where like people sell these sneaker bots like Cyber Soul and there's like a bunch of other ones. They're like 5K per bot just so you can like snipe some Yeezys when they drop. But you need to be able to battle those guys. Then you could tell me your blockchain scalable. But until you deal with that, like these tests mean nothing. I mean, that's what I'm taking away from all this.
yeah, and like I think some other blockchains have actually had these giant events, right? And like obviously ETH is more battle tested than Solana. And like I'm not going to pretend that it's not. And if like your highest priority is uptime, like ETH prioritizes liveness over everything, literally over everything. So like if that's your
Yeah.
requirement, then you just have to kind of go and eat the extra cost. Helium wasn't going to do that, right? Because it would have cost fucking like $5 to mint each hotspot, which is extremely expensive. And then it would have cost people a few dollars every single time they go and claim their rewards. And at that point, like you're, the rewards that you're claiming are not worth the amount that you're spending in transaction fees. It just wasn't possible. And I think that Solana will get to a point where it is as reliable as ETH. It just needs to have the crap beaten out of it until it totally feels comfortable removing the beta.
Yeah. No, I mean, the analogy I always make, because you bring up that point about liveness on ETH, is like, just look at the other deeds mint, and like people were paying thousands of dollars for a transaction that did not mint the NFT. And so they would lose like 2K, not mint it. And all right, you're out of luck, because that's just how much it costs to post the ETH blockchain at this time. So totally get that kind of philosophical difference between people in that ecosystem versus builders in Solana. I guess like quick follow up is, because you mentioned like a collective sigh of doing this on an app chain. What was the reaction when Helium did decide to move over to Solana? Was there some skepticism? Has the community embraced Solana at this point?
I think the community has embraced it at this point. I mean, it's a pretty different experience when you go from, I mean, even Helium was slower than Solana, right? I think you had to wait. I mean, I wasn't that familiar with it because I came on later, but I think it was like 30 seconds to a minute for a transaction to go through, whereas like now it's immediate. So as anything is, there's a lot of noise, and I have been paying way more acutely to the issues that people are having because I want to get rid of them. But it seems like we've gotten to the point now where the fever has mostly broken, and people are able to go and claim their rewards. There's literally like hundreds of thousands of transactions a day of people going and claiming the rewards. Things are working, and I think people like it. As far as the core teams, I think that people were definitely happy with not having to go and maintain a blockchain anymore. It was the blockchain was also written in Erlang, which is a really cool language for distributed systems, but like good luck finding people that can maintain it.
Good luck finding any Stack Overflow posts on that.
Yeah, I mean, like it's a cool language, and like I like Elixir too, which is kind of like built on top of it, but it's certainly not on Stack Overflow's languages people are most excited about. It's probably sitting there next to COBOL. Um, Whereas like Rust, people are very excited about.
I think one of the big sort of challenges developers face who want to do smart contract programming is just the difficulty of programming on something like Solana versus Solidity, or even like using these Move blockchains and the Move programming languages. Like, what's your journey been like onboarding as a smart contract programmer into Solana from your experience?
Yeah, so it used to be that programming on Solana was just absolutely painful, and not even because of the data model. So, like learning Solana's data model itself right now, that is what makes it harder than Solidity. Because I promise it's not that much harder with Anchor. Like the Rust is minimal. Like I encourage front end devs to do it often, because you don't need to be like this egghead like back end dev that really understands pointers and memory usage and things like that to write smart contracts on Solana. Not with Anchor, you don't. But like back in the day, right, when I was learning, Anchor didn't even exist. And literally, like anything you wanted to do was like balancing a checkbook. Like you had to repeat the same list of accounts like 17 times. And if God forbid passed one wrong account in the wrong order, it would just throw an error that said basically F you, because there was no like, it's not like, this specific account was off. But it's gotten so much easier now. And I really, I've looked at Move. It's cool. It's elegant. It's maybe slightly easier to write than Anchor. But also to me, I find those things as a real anti-selling point. Like when I was working in data infra, the only reason that I even looked at Solana was because data infra was starting to do more stuff in Rust because the deterministic memory usage is way better. And I wanted to learn Rust. Like Rust was my gateway drug into Solana. I never would have touched ETH. I knew about Solidity. I knew about blockchain forever. My co-founder at Strata was like, into blockchain in like 2015, 2016 and telling me to get into it. And I was like, nope, don't want to pin my career to this weird, obscure language called Solidity that nobody uses anywhere other than blockchain. F that. So like I actually
Nice.
people will fight me on this and I've fought people on Twitter about this, but I actually think that Rust is a huge selling point for Solana, and not having some specific esoteric blockchain language is actually better because people don't feel like they're pinning their career to it. Now, I'm sorry, gonna spoil this, but if you're using Rust and Anchor on Solana, you really don't have to be a Rust expert, and you're really not going to learn Rust that well. And so, like, I LARP as a Rust developer, but I'm really not. I write smart contracts in Rust, but it's again, Armani and friends have removed so much of the glass from it that it is kind of like its own language at this point.
It's a good point you bring up. Bigger pool developers that are interested in that language versus just like quote unquote blockchain languages, where I feel like a new one's coming out every week just in the ZK world, which is crazy to see.
And I feel like this is better, right? This is kind of it's more like a Ruby and Ruby on Rails relationship, right? Where like Anchor is Ruby on Rails and Rust is Ruby. And that to me is a much better model. And it means that like there are people that are building alternatives to Anchor. Someone's building like a more ORM like version of Anchor that has like primary key IDs and stuff. So like it's a lot more flexible when you can build on Rust. And Rust itself with macros is effing magic, and you can basically do whatever you want with it. So yeah, I don't really see Move being a differentiator for these blockchains. If anything, I can see it actually being a detriment in terms of onboarding new devs, because I'm sorry, like people who are familiar with Move and familiar with blockchains and love languages are like, cool, like I want to learn it. And I love languages and I love learning. But when I was in finance, I wasn't going to go learn some esoteric blockchain language. Like if I was going to pick up a new language, I'd be like, oh, I'm going to go learn a new functional language.
So currently there's IoT network. Obviously, they're rolling out the 5G network at the moment. Am I right in thinking that there'll be like a VPN network and maybe other networks that could be built on Helium? And also at the same time, I know the Hivemapper are building and leveraging Helium. So I'm just sort of wondering what this future is going to look like, where maybe you guys are building networks on Helium, but then other people are utilizing the wireless networks that you're providing to also do their own DePIN projects. So it's interested to get your view.
Yeah, so I think there's going to be a lot of integrations like Hivemapper, right? So for Hivemapper, for people that don't know, it's basically a thing where you like put a dash cam on your car and you can actually go and map the world with it, kind of like a Google Street View. For them, one of their problems is like, okay, I need to actually verify that you're in the location that you say that you're in, which is the thing has a GPS chip in it, I think, and it can track that. But one thing that's much harder to lie about is which Helium IoT hotspots are you within range of? And if you hit a bunch of them, it can tell you exactly where you are. Well, not exactly, but it can prove pretty closely that you're not just trying to game the system by, driving a thing around a circle somewhere else and claiming to be providing value, which is like, this is a constant problem with DePIN is like, people are just constantly trying to figure out. I mean, even like StepN has this problem where like people were running around with like scooters with like 17 phones on them, like trying to game the system. And even Helium has problems with people gaming it. So I think we'll see a bunch of integrations like that using Helium for location verification. We see things like using Helium for areas that don't have very much internet coverage because IoT signal has a much larger range. And then sub networks, yeah, I think we're going to see a ton more sub networks. I think, right now we're kind of in the proving stage where now we have two. Like going from 1 to 2 is a lot harder than going from 2 to 3. So, once mobile proves out, I'm sure we will see more. I've definitely heard people in the community talking about VPN. I've heard people talking about Wi-Fi. I've heard people talking about all sorts of things. To me, it's just kind of a race of whether or not someone else is able to do that more successfully first, right? Like Render's coming to Solana, right? So unless Render decides to join Helium as a sub DAO, which I would fucking love, but I don't think they're going to do it. Then is there a reason for us to go then launch a GPU based sub DAO? And the answer is probably not if Render's already doing a good job of it.
So, can you actually elaborate a bit on this structure you're alluding to here with regards to the DAO and the sub DAOs? Is the benefit for like these sub DAO products, let's call them, like the using the same token and kind of inheriting some of the infra that Helium already successfully used? Like, how does that all work?
Yeah, that's the idea. And generally, I say like we launch a sub DAO, but really be careful with using we because we don't right. Like the
Right, right.
community
Community.
actually votes and decides to launch these things, and literally anybody can launch one. So as to why you would want to do it with DAO approval, you have to get approved, obviously, to be a sub DAO. But yeah, why you'd want to do it is because you don't have to go and build all this stuff, right? Like you already have this, mint burn equilibrium. You already have this idea of a data credit. You have the entire might of the Helium community backing you, which helps, right? Because these sub DAOs, when they start out, they're almost kind of subsidized by the Helium network, and so they kind of get incubated. So it makes a lot of sense. And then yeah, you basically get everything working out of the box. The only thing you have to do is decide like one, what are my like rewardable entities going to be? So is it like hotspots? Are there mappers? Like what are all of my different types of characters that can get rewarded? I need to issue those as NFTs. And then I need to go and write some code to make an oracle that decides how much each one of these players gets in mining rewards each day, which is like relatively simple. Like if you wanted to go launch a network right now, that is the least of your problems trying to decide what each person gets for rewards. So it makes it a lot easier to just not think about things. That being said, we're also very interested in opening up all the tools that are generic. I mean, they're already open source, so you can use them, but right now it's no documentation. We kind of want to spin these things off so that you can also go and pull parts of Helium without necessarily pulling all of it.
It kind of reminds me, it's a bit of a crude analogy. It's not one to one, but like the mobile virtual network operators, you see like Mint Mobile, where, they borrow some of T Mobile's network and then resell at wholesale rates and then repackage it as Mint Mobile and then sell that to customers with maybe a different business model or different products, or just get Ryan Reynolds' face on there and just, do a bunch of commercials. So like it kind of, instead of bootstrapping your own wireless provider, you can maybe take advantage of some opportunities that as you see fit and kind of benefit as well from this existing infra.
Yeah, and even like Helium Mobile has this concept, like Nova Labs is the first carrier, but there can be multiple carriers. It's flexible, so Nova Labs might not end up being the only mobile carrier. There might be other ones that have different offerings, and they kind of each have their own cutout of rewards and incentives. Like they can decide how they reward things differently. But yeah, I mean, Helium Mobile is interesting too because people that are using the network can also get rewarded if they help map the network out, which again goes to show the kind of flexibility of this system. Like we're going from a world where the only thing that's rewardable is a hotspot to a world where generically anything can be rewardable, and we track any kind of ownership on chain. And so it doesn't just have to be a miner; it can be somebody that's participating in the network in another way and providing value. And so, like, even carriers themselves, like Nova Labs as an entity, as a carrier, is providing a service. And so the carrier itself is a rewardable entity. The subscribers on mobile are a rewardable entity. The miners on mobile are a rewardable entity. So it's really, really cool. Like, you can build all sorts of networks using this framework.
So, Noah, we obviously covered a lot in this interview in what I think is one of the most important and perhaps not talked about enough sectors in crypto in terms of decentralized physical infrastructure. I guess my final closeout question here is paint us a picture of this long-term vision for Helium. It's like right now today, Amazon, your Googles of the world, they own the cloud. Verizon's, AT&T's, and Comcast are kind of like who we have to access the internet through. But where does Helium fit into this longer term vision and this, I guess, in the words of Ryan Selkis, this war against censorship, which will be fought in the cloud? How do you see this all playing out?
I just don't think that fundamentally any other wireless network is going to be able to grow and provide coverage as well as Helium. Especially in underdeveloped areas, like the ability for someone to just go and buy one of these things and put it up in their house is so much more powerful for providing coverage. So I think, long term, Helium is going to be the best choice for wireless networks. I hope to see everything else kind of follow similar DePIN models. Like I would love to see ISPs somehow get decentralized, and it's really cool to see things like Render where we're decentralizing access to compute. But yeah, and long term for Helium, we've got a lot more plans around trying to decentralize things further. With this move to Solana, we had to move to oracles to scale, and we want to decentralize those oracles more and more. So there's a lot of interesting technical problems coming, and especially with more company joining us on Solana, it's going to be really cool to see what kind of DePIN ecosystem blooms here. I think it'll be kind of similar to what we saw with NFTs, where a whole bunch of new tooling comes out.
Super exciting. We can't wait to see what else Helium has in store for us all. Noah, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me.